Welcome to the Working with Subject Matter Experts podcast. If you're the lucky person responsible for keeping your business profitable into the future, you need to be a learning organization. So here at the Working with Subject Matter Experts podcast, we talk about managing organizational knowledge to keep your business strong. I'm your co-host, Nathan Eckel, and we are privileged to have with us today Peggy Salvatore. How are you, Peggy?
I'm fine this morning. How are you doing, Nathan?
I'm doing just great. This is going to be a little bit of a deeper dive today because a couple episodes ago, those people that have been following this podcast, they're going to say, hey, you were just talking about effective succession planning just a couple episodes ago. We're actually going to take a little deeper dive about that because we set the foundation in the prior episode about the missing element of succession planning, according to Peggy, is that knowledge transfer. It's just as important to have that in there as your normal succession planning with people. But let's up-level this, Peggy. So what can you add to that foundation? What's another element or an aspect of that element that really makes the difference for effective succession planning?
Isn't that a tongue twister?
It is. I almost went down the hole on that one.
Effective succession planning. And to think that we're almost professional podcasters at this point.
Almost.
Almost. We're almost there, Nathan. So what is the one thing that really makes a difference between traditional and effective succession planning? We've been talking about this, as you said, for quite a few podcasts now. And the one element is managing the knowledge within the organization to support the new leader. And the most important piece of that is making sure that you're capturing what you need to preserve what's most valuable about your company. So that's kind of where the series of filters of determining what's important about your company comes in. Because a lot of times what your customers come to you for, what the value that you provide to your customers may not always be immediately obvious to you. So, for example, and I think that Nathan and I were talking about this a little bit off mic before we even got started today. And we were talking about sometimes the most obvious things that you think your customers are coming to you for might be your patented process. It might be your intellectual property, something that you've been to the copyright office, or you've been to the patent office, or you've been to the FDA or whatever, and you have those processes nailed down. You know what they are. Those are your known corporate secrets, whatever. However, there are a lot of things that make your company special that may not be your patented processes, but they may be the way that it may be the way you have certain salespeople who approach customers in a certain way. It may be somebody you've had there for 40 years talking to your accounts who just knows them inside out, quiet woman in the corner, doing her job, talking to everybody, knows everybody, and maybe keeping some wheels greased that you don't know anything about. Those are the people that you need to find and capture what they know and make sure that you respect that information, because sometimes a new leader comes in and they may come in with an agenda or a hatchet or I always take 10% of the top off when I come into a new organization. Well, you better make sure that 10% you're taking off isn't 10% you really need. And that's why some of the most important things when you're looking at effective succession planning is not only making sure that you have that support of the learning in place, but that you know exactly what it is that you need to retain. And that's why you need to do a deep dive in your organization to see what your secret sauce really is. It may not be what you think it is.
Peggy, I just love the nuance and the detail that you include on there, because a lot of times, I mean, we read these fabled heroes. My tongue is in my cheek right now from the 80s and 90s, laying people off and chopping 10% off the organization. And what you're pretty strongly inferring here, it sounds like, is that there are all kinds of soft benefits, unarticulated benefits that are not coded into the organization as priorities or good things that are maybe invisible or unarticulated, but it definitely makes a huge change in the organization. I think about what they did in the 1950s with Eisenhower's administration, I think it was. I watched nerdy documentaries about the interstate system. And, it's great because it connected the whole country, but it wasn't so great in our cities because many of the neighborhoods that needed to be connected in the cities, they literally bulldozed part of the neighborhood and made an irreparable change. It almost seems like that's kind of the parallel that you might be talking about here. Am I on or a little off on that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's a matter of, you're coming in, you're making big change. You have the big picture and it has benefits. It's easy to sell, but to really take a deeper dive and look at the ramifications of everything that you've got in your wheelhouse before you start to knock out some spokes to extend the metaphor. And I've spoken with, in fact, I wrote a book for a man who was a turnaround artist. Basically, he would come into an organization. He said, every organization has 10% total fat in the organization. Don't need it. Eliminate it right away. I am not arguing with that philosophy. I think there's a lot of merit to that. What I'm saying is when you cut the fat, make sure you've looked very carefully before you do that. Because who your valuable people are not always who you think they are. Make sure you know what you're doing. Now, a lot of times when you have somebody come in, it's a culture change issue, in which case you probably do want to remove some defining people because you're trying to change the culture. That's a different issue. And we can get to that in later podcasts where we talk about what kind of knowledge do we want to retain. And there are three kinds, as you know. You have KSAs, right? Knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So sometimes the new leadership is coming in, bringing in a whole new gang, and attitude is the first thing they want to change. So you may find that they're cutting out the fat of what might have been the heart and soul of say, the prior leader. So it's a matter of making those determinations too. And we got a lot of podcasts to go before we get there. But basically, what is the defining thing? What's the definition of great succession planning, and what's the one element? And it's making sure you know what you've got around you before you start coming in with a hatchet.
So it's just wonderful that you're zeroing in not just about knowledge capture in the organization as part of the distinctive that ties right back to effective succession planning. I love that you're specifying it's a whole new universe of once you have the right knowledge, it's what kind of knowledge are you capturing? Once you know that you need to capture knowledge, it's back to that question, what is the right knowledge that you need to capture? And I think a really good segue for review, those who have already listened to this podcast in order, they remember this from one of the early episodes where we talked about the 4 unanswered questions, which is the reason why you wrote this book, Finding Your Subject Matter Experts. It's because of that very question. What is the right kind of knowledge to capture? That's one of the 4 questions, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely, it is. And that, again, we have plenty of podcasts. We can talk about a lot of things, but one of the things is to really be doing environmental scans at a very high level to see where your industry and not just your organization, but your industry and globally where the larger environment's going and how your business and your products and services fit into where the world is going. Because a little bit of short-sightedness there can crater you pretty quickly.
Yeah, for sure. So, is there anything else that you can mention on that? I think it's really important because there are so many. If you're in a growth industry and your business is booming by 30% a year, and you're in a hot industry right now, you think you're doing great until you look at the bigger picture where the actual industry is growing 10 times a year at 1,000%, and you're only growing 30%. You're not very competitive.
Exactly. And, and I think that'll be a really great couple of podcasts we can have about the kind of, we can do some checklists and the kind of things that companies need to do when they do an environmental scan to assess what's really critical information.
Absolutely. So, hey, everybody, this has been the Working with Subject Matter Experts podcast. I want to urge you, not just to listen to our next podcast where we're going to be talking about 2 critical questions for knowledge transfer and knowledge capture, but also get the book. Get the book. Apply the book. Finding Your Subject Matter Experts by Peggy Salvatore. It's got all the answers that you need right in there. Any final word, Peggy?
Not too much, except I don't know if it'll have all the answers you need, but I hope it helps point you in the right direction.
More than enough to start applying. So, hey,
yeah, get started.
This has been Working with Subject Matter Experts podcast. We'll see you on the next one.